I was 24, just out of college, trying to carve out a life in a new city. The apartment I found on Elmwood Avenue was a steel third floor, creaky hardwood floors, and windows that rattled like they were whispering secrets when the wind blew. The building was old, probably built before my grandparents were born, with peeling wallpaper in the hallways and an elevator that groaned like it was begging for retirement. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. My first real place, a symbol of independence. I was thrilled, even if the place had a certain weight to it, like it was watching me die. It was late November, and the city was gripped by a brutal storm. Rain pounded the windows, relentless, and the wind howled through every crack in the building, making the walls creak. I was sprawled on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, half watching a true crime documentary on my laptop, sipping lukewarm coffee to stay awake. The power had been flickering all evening, the lights buzzing and dimming like they were struggling to hold on. Then, without warning, snap, everything went black. The laptop died, the fridge stopped humming, and the room plunged into a darkness so thick it felt like it was pressing against my skin. I fumbled for my phone, cursing when I saw the battery at 3%. Perfect timing. I switched on the flashlight, and the beam cut through the dark, throwing shadows that twisted and danced across the walls like they had a life of their own. I told myself it was just a storm. Power outages were normal, especially in a building this old. I dug out a couple of candles I'd bought to make the place feel cozy and lit them, their flames flickering weakly in the drafty room. I sat back down, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. The rain was a constant roar, battering the windows like it was trying to get in. I pulled the blanket tighter, telling myself to relax, that the power would come back soon. Then I heard a faint thump from the hallway outside my door. It wasn't loud, not dramatic, just deliberate, like someone had dropped something. Heavy, but not too heavy, right outside my apartment. My heart skipped. My place was at the end of the hall, the last door before the stairwell, so there was no reason for anyone to be out there unless they were coming to see me. I froze, holding my breath, straining to hear over the storm. Nothing, just the wind howling and the rain hammering the glass. I told myself it was a neighbor, maybe someone stumbling in the dark, carrying groceries or something. But then it came again, thump, closer this time, right outside my door. My pulse kicked into high gear, and I stood up, gripping my phone like it was my only anchor to reality. The candlelight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows that made the room feel smaller, like the walls were closing in. I crept toward the door, my socks silent on the cold hardwood. The peephole was my only way to see what was out there, but my hand hesitated on the knob. Something in my gut screamed at me to stay put, to not look. I ignored it. I pressed my eye to the peephole, expecting to see a neighbor. Maybe the building's ancient maintenance guy, anyone normal. But the hallway was pitch black, not just dark black. The kind of black where you can't tell if your eyes are open or closed. The emergency lights, the ones that were supposed to glow during outages, were dead. I couldn't see a thing, not even a hint of movement. I backed away, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it could be heard outside. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the storm was messing with my head. Maybe it was just the wind knocking something over. But then I heard it, a slow, deliberate scrape, like someone dragging their fingernails across the door. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, purposeful, like whoever was out there wanted me to know they were there. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, every muscle locked in place. The scrape stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then a whisper. Not words, not exactly, but a low, guttural sound like someone trying to speak through a throat full of gravel. It was coming from the other side of the door, inches away. I didn't call out. Something deep inside me, some primal instinct, told me not to. Instead, I grabbed my phone, the battery now at 1%, and texted my friend Jake, who lived a few blocks away. Power's out, hearing weird noises. Can you come over? I hit send, praying it went through before the screen went black. It did, but the phone died right after, leaving me alone in the dark with whatever was outside. I clutched the candle, its flame trembling in my shaky hand, and backed up to the couch, my eyes glued to the door. The whispering stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt alive, heavy, like it was waiting for something. Then the doorknob rattled. Not violently, not like someone was trying to break in, but slow, deliberate, like they were testing it. Each twist sent a fresh wave of panic through me, my pulse pounding in my ears. I stared at the door, waiting for it to burst open, but it didn't. The lock held. The rattling went on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Each turn of the knob tightening the knot in my stomach. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, moving away down the hall. They weren't hurried, not rushed, just steady, like whoever it was knew they had all the time in the world. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door, waiting for the next sound. The storm kept raging, the wind screaming through the building, but nothing else came. Not for a while. I don't know how long I stood there, my legs aching, my hands shaking around the candle. The wax was dripping onto the floor, pooling in little globs, but I didn't care. I was too scared to move, too scared to do anything but watch the door. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a prank, some kids messing around in the blackout. But those footsteps, that whisper, they didn't feel human. They felt wrong, like something that didn't belong in this world. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed, startling me so bad I nearly dropped the candle. It was Jake. "I'm outside. Where you at?" I ran to the window, my legs wobbly, and looked down. His car was parked on the street, headlights cutting through the rain like a beacon. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. I still had to get to the door. I blew out the candle, grabbed my keys, and crept toward the door, my heart in my throat. I pressed my ear against it, listening. Nothing, just the storm. I opened the door. Just a crack, and peered into the hallway. The emergency lights had flickered on, casting a dim, sickly glow that barely reached the corners. The hallway was empty, or so I thought. As I stepped out, ready to bolt for the stairs, I saw it. At the far end of the hall, where the stairwell door was, something stood. It was tall, too tall, its head brushing the ceiling. Its shape was wrong, limbs too long, too thin, like they were stretched beyond what a human body could do. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, its form blurred in the dim light. Watching me, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed away, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't look out the peephole again. I didn't want to know what it was. I waited until morning, when the storm had passed and the power came back on. The hallway was empty when I finally checked, no sign of whatever I'd seen. Jake had given up and gone home, texting me to say he'd knocked but got no answer. I didn't tell him what I saw. I didn't tell anyone. I moved out a week later, leaving half my stuff behind. I couldn't stay in that apartment, not after that night. Sometimes, when the power flickers or the wind howls through my new place, I hear that scrape again. It's faint, distant, but it's there. I keep my doors locked now, always. And I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for me to let it in. Growing up, our family's cabin in the Adirondacks was my safe haven. Nestled in a quiet valley, surrounded by towering pines that stretched toward the sky, it was our escape from the city's chaos. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just a rusty generator. FOR power and a wood stove for warmth. As a kid, I'd spend summers tearing through the woods, fishing in the glassy lake, and lying under the stars, listening to Dad's stories about constellations and old mountain legends. It was pure magic, a place where the world felt simpler, kinder. But that summer when I was 19, everything changed. The magic turned sour, and the thought of that cabin now sends a shiver down my spine. I haven't been back since, and I don't think I ever will. It was August, and my parents decided we'd spend a week at the cabin, just the three of us. We arrived late in the afternoon, the sun sinking behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the silence was almost overwhelming after the city's constant hum. We unpacked our bags, cooked a simple dinner on the stove, and settled in for a night of card games by lantern light. It felt like stepping back in time, Mom's laughter filling the room, Dad's terrible puns making us groan, the soft flicker of the lanterns painting the walls with warmth. For a moment, everything was perfect. Then the storm rolled in. It wasn't a monster at first, just a low rumble in the distance, enough to make the pines sway and the windows rattle. We were deep in a heated round of gin rummy, betting pennies, and bragging rights when the generator sputtered and died. The cabin plunged into darkness, the lanterns our only light, their flames dancing nervously in the drafty room. Dad cursed under his breath, grabbing a flashlight from the counter. "Be back in 10, he said, pulling on his jacket and heading out to wrestle with the generator. Mom and I chuckled, betting he'd be out there for an hour, swearing at the old machine like it was an old friend who'd let him down. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. The storm grew angrier, the wind howling through the pines like a chorus of wails, shaking the cabin's walls. Mom's smile faded, her eyes darting toward the door. "He's fine," she said, but her voice was tight, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. I couldn't sit still. The air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down on us, squeezing the warmth out of the room. I grabbed a flashlight, ignoring Mom's protests. "I'm just gonna check on him." I sighed, trying to sound braver than I felt. My heart was already pounding, a nagging sense of dread settling in my gut. Outside, the cold bit through my hoodie, and the wind nearly knocked me off my feet. My flashlight beam barely pierced the darkness, the pines looming like silent giants, their branches swaying like arms reaching out. "Dad?" I called, my voice swallowed by the storm's roar. No answer. I followed the narrow path to the shed where the generator sat, my shoes crunching on the gravel, the sound sharp against the wind. The shed door was open, swinging wildly, banging against the frame. The generator was dead, its wires torn apart like something had ripped into it with claws. But Dad was nowhere to be seen. Panic clawed at my chest, sharp and cold. I pushed it down, telling myself he'd probably gone to check the breaker box by the cabin. He knew the place better than anyone. He couldn't be far. I turned back, sweeping the flashlight across the trees, their branches twisting in the wind. That's when I saw it, a figure just at the edge of the beam. It stood between two pines, motionless, its head tilted at an impossible angle, like its neck was broken. It wasn't Dad. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs bent in ways that defied nature, like a puppet with half its strings cut. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just watched, its eyes, or the dark hollows where eyes should have been glinting. Faintly in the flashlight's glow, my breath caught, the air thickening like I was breathing through a wet cloth. My legs froze, rooted to the ground, my heart hammering so loud I thought it would burst. The figure tilted its head further, almost like it was curious, studying me. Then, slowly, it raised a hand, or what passed for a hand, long and twisted, like branches warped by years of neglect, and pointed at the cabin. My blood turned to ice. I backed away, my flashlight shaking in my grip, and bolted back to the cabin, my shoes slipping on the wet gravel. I slammed the door behind me, my chest heaving, and fumbled with the lock. Mom was at the table, her face pale as moonlight, the candlelight casting sharp shadows across her features. "Where's your father?" she asked, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. I couldn't answer. I couldn't tell her what I'd seen out there in the trees. The words stuck in my throat, choked by fear. We locked the door tighter, shoved a heavy chair against it, and sat in the flickering candlelight. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting, like they were mocking us, their shapes bending into forms that didn't feel right. Every creak of the cabin, every howl of the wind, made my skin crawl. We didn't speak, just sat there, listening, waiting for Dad, waiting for something, anything to break the silence. Hours dragged by. The storm raging outside, shaking the windows like it wanted to tear the cabin apart. The candles burned low, their wax pooling on the table, the flames growing weaker. Around 3 a.m., we heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on the wall outside. Tap, 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 tap. It was deliberate. Steady, moving around the cabin, circling us like a predator. Mom grabbed my hand, her grip so tight it hurt, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't open the door," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Reflecting the candlelight like twin flames, the tapping continued. Relentless, circling the cabin, each tap tightening the knot in my stomach. My mind flooded with images of that figure in the trees, its bent limbs, its glinting eyes, the way it pointed at the cabin like it was claiming it. I tried to tell myself it was the storm, a branch hitting the walls, but the tapping was too. Precise, too intentional, like it was meant to drive us mad. It moved from the front wall to the side, then to the back, never speeding up, never slowing down. I wanted to scream, to make it stop, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The air felt heavier with each tap, like the cabin was shrinking around us. Then Just as suddenly as it started, the tapping stopped. The silence was worse, thick, and oppressive, like the cabin was holding its breath. We stayed frozen, clutching each other, the candles barely flickering now. I kept my eyes on the door, half expecting it to burst open, but nothing came. The storm roared on, the wind screaming through the pines, but the tapping didn't return. We sat there, hearts pounding, waiting for dawn. Waiting for the light to chase away whatever was out there. At dawn, we heard Dad's voice. "Let me in," he called, muffled through the door. "It's cold out here." Relief surged through me, warm and fleeting, but Mom didn't move. She stared at the door, her face rigid, her hand still gripping mine. "That's not him," she whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling with something deeper than fear. I didn't understand. It sounded like Dad's same gravelly tone, same slight drawl he'd had since I was a kid. But her fear was contagious, sinking into me like ice. "Ask him something only he'd know," she said. Her eyes locked on the door. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Dad, what's the name of the dog we had when I was 5? Silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Then his voice came again, slower, colder, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Let me in." My stomach dropped. It wasn't an answer. It was wrong, like a mimic wearing his voice, not quite getting it right. We didn't open the door. We stayed huddled together, the candles long burned out, until the sun rose and the storm's roar faded to a whisper. When we finally opened the door, Dad was there, sitting on the porch, shivering, his clothes soaked through. He said the generator had shorted out and he'd gotten lost in the woods trying to find his way back in the dark. He didn't remember calling out to us, didn't remember knocking. His story didn't add up, but we didn't press him. His eyes looked different, distant, like he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. We packed up and left that day, the cabin sitting silent behind us. Its windows like eyes watching us go. We never talked about that night again. Mom and Dad don't mention the cabin anymore, and I don't ask. But I see the way Mom looks at Dad sometimes, like she's not sure who came back from the woods. I moved to the city after that, far from the pines, but some nights, when the wind howls or the power flickers, I hear that tapping again, faint, deliberate, circling. I check the locks, keep the lights on, and try to forget, but I know something's out there, waiting in the dark, waiting for me to let it in. I've been a nurse for 10 years, working the night shift at a small community hospital in rural Ohio. The place is old. Built in the 50s, with long, echoing hallways and fluorescent lights that flicker even on the best days. You see a lot. In a hospital like that, car accidents, heart attacks, people at their most vulnerable, clinging to life or letting go. I thought I'd seen it all, hardened by years of long shifts and heartbreak, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened during the blackout last winter. It's the kind of thing that burrows into your mind, gnaws at your dreams, and makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world. It was a quiet night in January, a kind of night where the hospital felt more like a ghost town than a place of healing. Just me, Sarah, and one other nurse were on the floor, tending to a handful of patients, mostly elderly folks recovering from surgeries or battling chronic illnesses. The air was heavy with the smell of antiseptic, and the silence was so thick every sound seemed amplified, the hum of a monitor, the shuffle of my sneakers on the linoleum. Around midnight, a snowstorm swept in, fierce and unrelenting, blanketing the town in white. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. The backup generators kicked in with a low groan, but they only powered the essentials life support machines, a few dim overhead lights in the hallways. The rest of the hospital sank into darkness, the corridors stretching out like endless tunnels swallowed by shadow. I was at the nurse's station, updating charts by the faint glow of an emergency light, my pen scratching against the paper. When I heard it, a faint rhythmic beeping. It wasn't a patient monitor, not one of our machines. This was different, high-pitched and erratic, like a child's toy left on by mistake, its batteries running low. I paused, my pen hovering, and glanced at Sarah, who was sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone, the screen casting a blue glow on her face. "You hear that?" I asked, my voice low, like I was afraid to disturb the silence. She frowned, tilting her head. "Yeah, what the hell is that?" We grabbed a flashlight from under the desk, its beam cutting a thin path through the dark as we headed down the hall. The hospital felt different without the full lights, like it wasn't the same place we'd worked in for years. The air was colder, the silence heavier, broken only by the faint hum of the generators and the howling wind outside. The beeping was coming from room 214, an empty room at the far end of the corridor. We'd had a patient there earlier that week, an old man named Mr. Hargrove, who'd passed after a long battle with lung cancer. His death was peaceful, expected, but it left the room feeling hollow, like it was waiting for something. The room hadn't been reassigned yet, the bed stripped. The monitor's silent. Sarah pushed the door open, and the beeping stopped like someone had flipped a switch. The room was empty, just a bed with crisp white sheets, a chair in the corner, and a window coated in frost, glowing faintly from the moonlight outside. I swept the flashlight across the walls, revealing nothing but peeling paint and the sharp, sterile smell of antiseptic. "Weird," Sarah muttered, her voice tight. We checked the room, looking under the bed, in the corners, behind the chair. Nothing. No toys, no machines, no loose wires that could have made that sound. We chalked it up to the storm, maybe a glitch in the old wiring, and headed back to the station, laughing nervously to shake off the unease that clung to us like damp clothes. An hour later, the beeping started again, louder this time, more insistent, like it was demanding to be heard. It was definitely coming from room 214. Sarah's face paled, her coffee mug trembling in her hands. "I'm not going back there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's too creepy." I didn't blame her, the sound was unnerving, like it was calling us, pulling us back. But I couldn't ignore it. It felt personal, like it was meant for me. I grabbed the flashlight, my heart already thudding, and headed down the hall alone, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The door to 214 was cracked open, even though I was sure we'd closed it tight. The air felt colder as I approached, like stepping into a freezer. I pushed the door open and the beeping stopped again. My flashlight beam swept the room empty, just like before. But this time, something was different. In the corner by the frosted window, there was a shape. Not a person, not exactly, but a shadow that didn't move right. It was hunched over, its edges blurry, like it was made of smoke or fog, shifting in the dim light. The air thickened, heavy, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my grip, the beam locked on the shape. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt it watching me, its presence pressing against my mind like a weight. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd pass out, then a voice not out loud, but in my head, low and raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "Stay," it said, "stay with us." The words slithered through my thoughts, cold and sharp, making my skin crawl. I backed out of the room, my legs shaky, and slammed the door behind me, the sound echoing down the hall. I ran back to the station, my breath ragged, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. Sarah was there, pale as a ghost, her eyes wide. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. We didn't talk about it after that. Didn't tell anyone. We sat at the station, jumping at every sound, the wind rattling the windows, the hum of the generators, the distant beep of a monitor, the power. Came back on a few hours later, the fluorescent lights buzzing to life, chasing the shadows away. The hospital felt normal again, or as normal as it could. But something had changed, like a crack had formed in the world I thought I knew. I started noticing things in the days that followed. Charts moved when no one was around, doors left ajar when they should have been locked. The faint sound of beeping echoing down the hall late at night. Sarah heard it too, though she wouldn't admit it. She'd just shake her head, her eyes avoiding mine, and change the subject. It wasn't just the beeping. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye shadows that moved too fast, shapes that vanished when I turned to look. Room 214 was the worst. I avoided it as much as I could, but sometimes I'd have to pass it on my rounds. The air always felt colder there, heavier, like the room was holding its breath. Once, I swore I saw the door crack open on its own, just an inch, but when I checked, it was locked tight. I told myself it was the stress, the long hours, the blackout messing with my head, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I started having dreams about room 214 dark, suffocating dreams where I'd stand in the doorway, unable to move, while that shadowy shape in the corner grew taller, its raspy voice whispering, "Stay with us." I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the echo of that voice lingering in my ears. I stopped sleeping well, started drinking too much coffee to stay alert, but the exhaustion only made it worse. The hospital, once a place I felt in control, became a maze of shadows and whispers. I requested a transfer a month later. I couldn't stay in that hospital, not after what I'd seen, what I'd felt. I'm at a new place now, a modern hospital with bright lights and wide, open hallways. It's different, safer, but I still work nights, and I'm careful. I check the corners, keep the lights on when I can. But some nights, when the power flickers or the wind howls outside, I hear that beeping again, faint, erratic, like a toy, running out of batteries. And sometimes in the quiet moments, I hear that voice, soft and rasping, slipping into my thoughts. Stay, it says, like it's still waiting for me. I don't go near empty rooms anymore, not if I can help it. I don't look into the shadows, but I know something's out there, something that came alive in the blackout, something tied to room 214. I keep my head down, focus on my work, and try to forget. But I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching, still waiting for me to come back and stay. I'd always been a bit of a nomad, chasing jobs and new experiences across the country. When I was 27, I took a gig as a freelance photographer, which landed me in a small town off Route 17 in upstate New York. The job was simple: shoot some landscapes for a local tourism board, but I needed a place to crash for a few weeks. A friend hooked me up with a rental, a creaky old house on the edge of town, surrounded by fields and a dense line of trees. It was isolated, the kind of place where you could scream and no one would hear. The house was cheap though, and I figured I could handle the cork-sagging floors, drafty windows, and a basement door that never stayed shut. Besides, I was only there for a month. What could go wrong? It was mid-October, and the weather was turning fast. The days were crisp, but the nights brought biting winds and storms that rolled in without warning. I'd been in the house for a week, getting used to its groans and creaks when a big storm hit. I was editing photos on my laptop, the glow of the screen my only company, when the power flickered and died. The house went dark, the kind of dark that swallows everything. No streetlights, no neighbors, just an endless black void outside the windows. I cursed, fumbling for my phone. The battery was at 5%, barely enough to power the flashlight. I swept the beam around the living room, the light catching on faded wallpaper and the dusty furniture that came with the place. The shadows seemed to shift, like they were moving just beyond the beam. I told myself it was just a storm, nothing to worry about. The house was old and outages were probably common out here. I rummaged through the kitchen drawers, finding a couple of half-melted candles and a box of matches. I lit them, placing them on the coffee table, their flames flickering in the drafty room. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the house groaned like it was alive. I sat on the couch, trying to stay calm, but the silence between the storm's gusts felt heavy, like it was waiting for something. I pulled a blanket over my shoulders, the chill seeping into my bones, and tried to focus on the sound of the rain. Then I heard a low, rhythmic thud from the basement. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, like someone dropping a heavy book on the floor over and over. My heart skipped. The basement door was in the kitchen, just off the living room, and I'd noticed it swinging open on its own sometimes. No matter how many times I latched it, I'd chalked it up to the house settling, but this sound was different, deliberate, like it wanted my attention. I grabbed my phone, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand, and crept toward the kitchen. The thud came again, louder, echoing. Up through the floorboards, I stood at the basement door, my hand hovering over the knob. The air felt colder here, like it was leaking up from below. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the storm. No answer, just another thud, closer now, like it was right at the bottom of the stairs. I told myself it was probably a pipe, maybe something loose banging around down there, but my gut told me otherwise. I opened the door, just a crack, and shone the flashlight down the stairs. The beam didn't reach far, swallowed by the darkness below. The basement smelled damp, earthy, like something forgotten. I couldn't see anything, but the thud stopped, replaced by a faint scraping. Like nails on concrete, I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding, and shoved a chair against it. I wasn't going down there, not alone, not in the dark. I backed into the living room, clutching my phone, The battery now at 2%. I texted my friend who'd arranged the rental. Power's out. Hearing noises in the basement? You know anything about this place? I hit send, praying it went through. The screen dimmed, then died, leaving me with just the candles. The wind screamed outside and the house creaked, but the scraping from the basement didn't stop. It was faint, almost drowned out by the storm, but it was there, steady and relentless. Like something pacing down below, I sat on the couch, eyes locked on the kitchen, the candlelight casting long shadows that seemed to twist and stretch when I wasn't looking. The scraping grew louder, closer, like it was climbing the stairs. I told myself I was imagining it, that the storm was messing with my head. But then the basement door rattled, a sharp, violent shake that made the chair jump. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The rattling stopped, but the scraping didn't. It was right behind the door now, slow and deliberate, like something dragging itself across the wood. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The candles were burning low, their flames flickering wildly in the draft. I didn't know what to do, call for help, but my phone was dead. Run outside, but the storm was a wall of rain and wind. I was trapped. The scraping stopped, and for a moment the house was silent, save for the storm. Then, a voice not loud, not clear, but low and guttural, like it was coming from deep in the earth. "Come down," it said, the words slithering through the air, not quite human. It was coming from the basement, from behind the door. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. The door rattled again, harder this time, the chair sliding an inch across the floor. I gripped the knife tighter, backing toward the living room window, my eyes never leaving the door. The voice came again, softer, almost pleading. "Come down." I wanted to scream, to tell it to leave me alone, but my voice was gone, stuck in my throat. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing me down, urging me toward the basement. The rattling stopped, and the silence was worse. It felt alive, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. I stood there, knife in hand, staring at the door, expecting it to burst open, but it didn't. Instead, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, climbing the basement stairs. Each step was deliberate, echoing through the house, getting closer. I backed up until I hit the wall, the knife trembling in my grip. The footsteps stopped, just behind the door, and I waited, my breath shallow, for whatever was coming next. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. The candles were nearly gone, their flames barely flickering. The storm raged on, the wind howling like it was laughing at me. Then a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on the other side of the door. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, purposeful, like it was taunting me. I wanted to run, to get out of that house, but the storm outside was a wall of chaos, and I had nowhere to go. The tapping continued, circling the door, then spreading, like it was coming from the walls now, all around me. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, listening to the tapping, the wind, the creaks of the house. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was an animal, something trapped in the basement? But animals don't speak, don't say, "Come down," in a voice that makes your skin crawl. I thought about the history of the house. My friend had mentioned it was old, that it had been empty for years before I moved in. I hadn't asked why, but now I wished I had. The tapping stopped and the silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. Around 4 a.m., I heard a car outside. Headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the living room for a moment. It was my friend responding to my text. I ran to the window, waving frantically, my heart leaping with relief. But as I turned back, the basement door creaked open, just an inch, the chair sliding aside like it was nothing. I froze, the knife slipping from my hand, clattering to the floor. In the doorway, barely visible in the dim candlelight, was a shape tall, too tall, its form blurred like it was made of shadows. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, its presence filling the room with dread. I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn it. I didn't look back, didn't want to see if it was following me. I stumbled into the rain, the cold hitting me like a slap, and ran to my friend's car. He didn't ask questions, just drove, his face pale as I babbled about the noises, the voice, the shape. I stayed at his place that night, and the next day I grabbed my stuff from the house in broad daylight, refusing to go near the basement. I never went back. Now I'm in a new town. Far from Route 17, I stick to apartments with bright lights and neighbors close by. But some nights, when the power flickers or the wind howls, I hear that tapping again, faint, rhythmic, circling. I check the locks, keep a knife nearby, and try to forget. But I know something's out there, something that came alive in that blackout, waiting for me to come down. I've always been a bit of a drifter, taking odd jobs and moving wherever the wind carried me. At 29, I found myself in a nowhere town in eastern Oregon, working as a night clerk at a rundown motel off a lonely highway. The place was a relic faded. Neon sign, peeling paint, and rooms that smelled like mildew and regret. It was the kind of spot truckers and wanderers stopped at when they had nowhere else to go. I didn't mind the isolation. I liked the quiet, the way the desert stretched, out endlessly under the stars. But after that night, I learned there's a difference between quiet and empty. And something was waiting in the dark at that motel. It was early December, and a storm was brewing, the kind that makes the air feel electric. I was behind the front desk, flipping through a dog-eared paperback, the only light coming from a flickering desk lamp and the vending machine's hum outside. The motel had 3 guests that night: a trucker in room 6, a couple in room 12, and an older guy in room 3. It was a slow shift, the kind where you count the hours by the ticks of the clock. Around 1, the storm hit hard. Wind screamed across the desert, rattling the windows, and the power flickered once, twice, then died. The motel plunged into darkness, the lamp cutting out, the vending machine's hum silenced. The only sound was the storm howling like it was alive. I fumbled under the desk for the flashlight I kept for emergencies, my hands brushing against old receipts and dust. The beam was weak, barely cutting through the dark, but it was better than nothing. I checked my phone, 4% battery, no signal out here in the middle of nowhere. The motel's backup generator was supposed to kick in, but it didn't. Figures. I lit a couple of emergency candles from the supply closet, their flames casting a dim glow across the lobby. The shadows moved strangely, stretching and curling, like they were reaching for something. I told myself it was just the storm, just my imagination running wild in the dark. I decided to check on the guests, make sure they were okay. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, the wind hitting me like a fist, carrying sand that stung my face. The motel's neon sign was dead, and the desert beyond was a black void, the stars hidden by storm clouds. I knocked on room 6 first. The trucker's room, no answer. I figured he was asleep. He'd checked in exhausted, saying he'd driven 12 hours straight. I moved on to room 12, the couple. The door was cracked open, which was odd, but when I called out, no one responded. The room was empty, their bags still there like they'd just stepped out. I told myself they'd probably gone to their car. Spooked by the blackout. Room 3, the older guy, was the same, no answer, door locked, no sign of life. Back in the lobby, I felt uneasy, the kind of unease that sits in your gut like a stone. The storm was relentless, the wind shaking the walls. But there was something else, a faint sound almost lost in the howl. It was a low, rhythmic scratching, like something sharp dragging across metal. It was coming from the direction of the vending machine outside, just beyond the lobby windows. I shone the flashlight through the glass, but the beam didn't reach. Far, swallowed by the dark. The scratching stopped, then started again, louder, closer. Like it was right outside the door, I gripped the flashlight tighter, my heart picking up speed. I told myself it was probably debris, a branch or piece of trash caught in the wind. But the scratching was too steady, too deliberate, like someone or something was trying to get my attention. I stepped closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass, and peered out. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shape, low to the ground, darting just beyond the light. It was gone before I could be sure, but my skin prickled, a chill running down my spine. I backed away, locking the lobby door, though it felt flimsy against the storm. The candles were burning low, their flames flickering in the drafty room. I sat behind the desk, trying to stay calm, but the scratching didn't stop. It moved, circling the building, scraping along the walls like it was looking for a way in. I checked my phone, dead now, no way to call for help. The motel felt smaller, the walls closing in, the shadows growing darker. Then a new sound, a soft, rhythmic thump like footsteps coming from the hallway that led to the guest rooms. It was slow, deliberate, echoing through the empty motel. I froze, my heart hammering. The guests were supposed to be in their rooms, but I'd just checked and they were gone. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the storm. No answer, just another thump closer now, like it was right around the corner. I shone the flashlight down the hall, but the beam didn't reach far, the darkness too thick. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was silence, broken only by the wind. Then a voice, low, guttural, barely audible over the storm. "Open the door," it said, coming from the hallway, from the dark. I didn't move. I couldn't. The voice wasn't human, it was too rough, too hollow, like it was coming from something that didn't know how to speak. The scratching started again, louder, right outside the lobby door, like claws raking across the metal. I gripped the flashlight, my hands shaking, and backed toward the desk. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Open the door." It wasn't a request. It was a demand, cold and unyielding. The footsteps resumed, slow and heavy, moving down the hall, then stopping. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing me down, urging me to obey. I didn't. I stayed where I was, my eyes darting between the lobby door and the hallway. The candles were nearly gone, their flames barely flickering, casting wild shadows that seemed to move on their own. The scratching grew frantic, like whatever was outside was losing patience. Then a loud bang against the lobby door, so hard. The glass rattled in its frame. I jumped, dropping the flashlight, the beam spinning across the floor. I scrambled to pick it up, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The banging stopped, but the scratching didn't, circling the building again. Relentless. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, listening to the scratching, the footsteps, the voice that kept whispering. "Open the door." It felt like hours, the storm raging outside, the motel creaking like it was alive. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was the guests, playing a sick prank. But the guests were gone, their rooms empty. I thought about the motel's history, rumors I'd heard from locals about strange disappearances, travelers, who checked in and never checked out. I'd laughed it off at the time, but now it didn't seem so funny. Around 4 a.m., I heard a car engine. Headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the lobby for a moment. It was a highway patrol car, probably checking the roads after the storm. I ran to the window, waving the flashlight, my heart leaping with relief. The scratching stopped, the footsteps faded, and the voice went silent. I unlocked the door, stumbling into the rain, and flagged down the officer. He didn't ask many questions, just drove me to the nearest gas station where I called a friend to pick me up. I didn't go back to the motel that night or ever. I quit the job, left my stuff behind, and moved on. Now I'm in a new city, far from that highway. I stick to places with bright lights and people nearby. But some nights when the power flickers or the wind howls, I hear that scratching again, faint, deliberate, circling. I check the locks, keep a flashlight close, and try to forget. But I know something's out there, something that came alive in that blackout, waiting for me to open the door. I'd always loved the open country, the way the horizon stretched forever under a big sky. At 26, I took a job as a caretaker for an old farmhouse in the middle of the Nebraska plains, miles from the nearest town. The place was a fixer-upper owned by an elderly couple who'd moved to the city but couldn't bear to sell it. My job was simple: keep the place standing, check the fences, and make sure the pipes didn't freeze. The farmhouse was weathered, with sagging porches and windows that whistled in the wind, but it had charmed creaky floors, a stone fireplace, and a quiet that felt like a hug after years in noisy cities. I didn't mind the solitude. At least not at first. It was late February, and the plains were locked in a bitter cold snap. I'd been at the farmhouse for a month, getting used to its quirks, the way the wind moaned through the attic, the way the floors groaned under my steps. That night, a storm was brewing, the kind that made the air feel heavy, charged with something restless. I was in the living room, stoking the fireplace, the glow of the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. My laptop was open, playing a podcast to keep me company when the power flickered and died. The farmhouse plunged into darkness, the podcast cutting off, the hum of the heater gone. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. and the world felt like it had been swallowed by a void. I grabbed my flashlight from the coffee table. Its beam weak, but steady, cutting through the dark. My phone was at 6% battery, no signal out, here in the middle of nowhere. I cursed under my breath, knowing the nearest neighbor was a 20-minute drive away. The fireplace was my only light now, its flames flickering wildly as the wind screamed down the chimney. I told myself it was just a storm, that the power would come back soon. The farmhouse was old and the electrical system was finicky. I found a couple of candles in a kitchen drawer, lit them, and set them on the table. Their glow warm but fragile against the vast darkness. I sat by the fire, pulling a blanket over my shoulders, trying to shake the unease creeping into my chest. The storm was relentless, the wind battering the house like it wanted to tear it apart. The windows rattled, and the attic groaned above me like the house was alive and restless. Then I heard a faint rhythmic creak from the back porch. It wasn't the wind. It was too steady, too deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth. My heart skipped, and I gripped the flashlight tighter. The back porch was just off the kitchen, a rickety thing I rarely used. No one should be out there, not in this storm. Not this far from civilization, I crept to the kitchen, my socks silent on the cold floor, and shone the flashlight through the window above the sink. The beam caught the porch, empty except for an old rocking chair swaying in the wind. I told myself that was the chair creaking as it rocked. But as I watched, the chair stopped, like someone had grabbed it. The creak came again, slower, from the other side of the porch, out of sight. My pulse quickened and I backed away, my eyes locked on the back door. It was locked, but the deadbolt looked flimsy, like it wouldn't hold against a strong push. I returned to the living room, telling myself I was overreacting. Storms make you jumpy, especially when you're alone. I added another log to the fire, the crackle grounding me, and sat back down. But then the creak turned into a thump, heavier, like footsteps on the porch. They were slow, deliberate, moving toward the back door. I froze, my breath shallow, listening over the storm. The thumping stopped, and for a moment there was silence, broken only by the wind. Then a new sound, a low, guttural hum, like someone chanting under their breath. It was coming from outside, right by the door. I grabbed a poker from the fireplace, its weight cold and reassuring in my hand. The hum grew louder, not words exactly, but a deep, rhythmic drone that made my skin crawl. I crept back to the kitchen, my flashlight shaking, and peered through the window again. Nothing, just the porch, the chair, the endless dark beyond. But the hum didn't stop. It was closer now, like it was coming from inside the house. I spun around, sweeping the flashlight across the kitchen, empty. The candles flickered, their flames bending like they were scared. The hum shifted, moving. To the living room, then back, like it was circling me. I checked the back door still locked, the deadbolt in place. But the hum was louder, almost vibrating through the walls. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice cracked, weak against the storm. No answer, just the hum, steady and relentless. My phone was dead now, no way to call for help. I was alone, miles from anyone, with whatever was making that sound. The thumping started again, this time from the front door, heavy and deliberate, like someone testing it. I ran to the living room, clutching the poker. My heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. The front door rattled. The sound sharp and violent, like something was trying to get in. I backed toward the fireplace, the poker raised, my eyes locked on the door. The hum grew louder, weaving through the thumping, a sickening chorus that filled the house. Then a voice, low, raspy, barely audible over the storm. "Let us in," it said, not from the door, but from everywhere, like it was coming from the walls themselves. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't human. It was too hollow, too deep, like it was scraped from the bottom of something ancient. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to move, checking the windows, making sure every lock was secure. The candles were burning low, their flames barely holding on. The thumping spread, coming from the back. Door again, then the windows, like whatever was out there was circling the house, looking for a way in. The voice came again, clearer, colder, "Let us in." It wasn't a request, it was a demand, heavy with menace. I gripped the poker tighter, my hands shaking, and backed into the corner. The fire's warmth at my back. The thumping stopped, but the hum didn't. It grew louder, vibrating through the floor, like it was coming from below the house. I thought of the crawl space under the farmhouse, a damp, narrow space I'd never bothered to check. The thought made my stomach twist. What if something was down there? The hum shifted, moving upward, like it was climbing the walls, seeping into the attic. The ceiling creaked above me, slow and deliberate, like footsteps pacing back and forth. I shone the flashlight upward, but the beam didn't reach far. Swallowed by the dark, I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, listening to the hum, the creaks, the occasional thump against the doors. The storm raged on, the wind screaming like it was part of whatever was out there. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was the storm, amplifying sounds, messing with my head. But the voice, the hum, they weren't natural. I thought about the farmhouse's history. The couple had mentioned it had been in their family for generations, but they never said why they left. Locals in town had hinted at strange stories, disappearances on the plains, but I brushed it off as small-town gossip. Around 5 a.m., I heard a truck in the distance. Headlights cut through the storm, faint but growing closer. It was the neighbor, probably checking the roads after the storm. The hum stopped, the creaking faded, and the voice went silent. I ran to the window, waving the flashlight, my heart leaping with relief. I didn't care who it was, I just needed someone else there. I unlocked the front door, stumbling into the cold, the wind biting my face. The neighbor, an older guy with a weathered face, didn't ask questions. He just drove me to town, where I crashed at a diner until morning. I didn't go back to the farmhouse. I called the couple, told them I was done, and left my stuff behind. I'm in a new state now, sticking to cities with bright lights and people nearby. But some nights, when the power flickers or the wind howls, I hear that hum again, low, guttural circling. I check the locks, keep a flashlight close, and try to forget. But I know something's out there, something that came alive in that blackout, waiting for me to let it in. I've always been drawn to the sea, the way it stretches out forever, wild and untamed. At 30, I took a job as a temporary keeper for a lighthouse on a rocky bluff off the Maine coast. It was a lonely gig, just me and the old tower perched on a cliff with nothing but the ocean and a few scraggly pines for company. The lighthouse was ancient, built in the 1800s with creaking stairs, salt-stained windows, and a keeper's cottage that smelled of damp wood and mildew. I didn't mind the isolation. It was a chance to clear my head, to escape the noise of city life. But after that night, I learned the sea hides things that come alive when the lights go out. It was late March, and the coast was caught in a brutal nor'easter. The wind screamed across the bluff, shaking the cottage like it was trying to tear it from the rocks. I was in the keeper's quarters, a small room attached to the lighthouse, sipping coffee and reading an old logbook from the 1920s to pass the time. The lighthouse's beacon was automated, but I had to check it nightly, make sure the generator kept it spinning. Around 10 p.m., the storm hit its peak. The power flickered, the lights buzzing like angry bees, then died completely. The cottage went dark, the hum of the generator silenced, and even the lighthouse beacon stopped, leaving the cliff in a blackness so deep it felt like the world had vanished. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting a thin path through the dark. My phone was at 7% battery, no signal this far out, surrounded by ocean and storm. The cottage felt colder without the heater, the wind slipping through cracks in the walls, carrying the salty tang of the sea. I lit a couple of candles I'd found in a drawer, their flames flickering nervously, casting shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. The storm was relentless, waves crashing against the rocks below, the sound like thunder that never stopped. I told myself it was just a power outage that the generator would kick back on soon. But the silence between the storm's roars felt heavy. Like it was holding its breath, I decided to check the generator, housed in a shed behind the cottage. I pulled on my raincoat, the wind nearly ripping the door from my hands as I stepped. Outside, the flashlight beam barely pierced the rain, the bluff swallowed by darkness, the ocean a churning void below. The shed was locked, but the generator was dead, its fuel line clogged or cut. I couldn't tell in the dark. I cursed, knowing I'd have to wait out the storm. As I turned back, I heard it, a low, rhythmic scraping like metal dragging across stone. It was coming from the lighthouse tower, just up the path. My heart skipped, the cold sinking deeper into my bones. The tower was locked, and I was the only one on the bluff. No one could be up there, not in this storm. I swept the flashlight. toward the tower, its silhouette looming against the storm clouds, but the beam didn't reach far enough. The scraping continued, slow and deliberate, like something heavy being dragged down the spiral stairs inside. I told myself it was the wind, maybe a loose panel banging in the storm, but the sound was too steady, too purposeful. I headed back to the cottage, my boots slipping on the wet rocks, the scraping growing louder behind me. Inside, I locked the door, my hands shaking as I set the flashlight on the table. The candles were burning low, their flames bending in the drafty room. The scraping stopped, but a new sound took its place, a faint, rhythmic thump, like footsteps circling the cottage. My pulse quickened, and I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox by the fireplace, its weight cold but solid in my hand. The thumping moved to the front door, slow and heavy, like someone pacing just outside. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice was shaky, swallowed by the storm's roar. No answer, just another thump, closer now, right against the door. I backed away. Clutching the crowbar, my eyes locked on the door. The wind howled, the windows rattling like they might shatter. Then a voice low, wet, like someone speaking, through a mouthful of seawater. "Come up," it said, not from the door, but from above, like it was coming from the lighthouse tower. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't human, it was too deep, too guttural, like it belonged to something, dredged from the ocean's depths. The thumping stopped, but the voice came again, clearer, colder. "Come up!" I didn't move. My legs felt like lead, my heart pounding so hard I could barely think. The candles flickered, their flames nearly gone, casting wild shadows that seemed to twist into shapes-long limbs, bent forms, things that didn't belong. I checked the door still locked, the deadbolt holding. But the thumping started again, this time from the roof, like something was walking up there, heavy and deliberate. The ceiling creaked, dust drifting down in the candlelight. I shone the flashlight upward, but the beam showed nothing. Just the warped wooden beams. The voice came again, now from the walls surrounding me. "Come up!" It was insistent, pulling at me like it was trying to draw me to the tower. I gripped the crowbar tighter, my hands sweating despite the cold. The thumping spread, moving from the roof to the windows, then back to the door like whatever was out there was circling, testing every entry. I thought about running, but the storm was a wall of wind and rain, and the bluff was a half-mile of rocky path to the mainland. I was trapped, alone with whatever was making that sound. The scraping started again louder from the tower, like it was calling me. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank, some local kids messing with the new guy. But no one could be out in this storm, and that voice, it wasn't human. I thought about the lighthouse's history, the old logbook I'd been reading. It mentioned storms, shipwrecks, keepers who vanished without a trace. I thought they were just stories, but now they felt real, like warnings I should have heeded. The thumping grew frantic, the door shaking in its frame. I backed toward the fireplace, the last candle flickering out, plunging the room into near darkness. The flashlight was dimming, its battery fading. Then a new sound, a low, rhythmic hum, like a chant weaving through the thumping. It was coming from everywhere, vibrating through the walls, the floor, the air. The voice joined it, louder now. "Come up." I wanted to scream, to make it stop, but my voice was gone, stuck in my throat. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing me toward the door. Urging me to the tower, I stayed put, crowbar raised, my eyes darting between the door and the windows. The hum grew louder, the thumping more insistent, like whatever was out there was losing patience. Then a loud crash from the tower, like something heavy had fallen inside. The hum stopped, the thumping stopped, and the voice went silent. I waited, my breath shallow, expecting it to start again. But the silence was worse, thick and oppressive, like the storm was holding its breath. I didn't move, didn't dare. Checked the tower. I stayed by the fireplace, the dying embers my only light. Around 6 a.m., the storm began to ease, the wind dying to a low moan. I heard a vehicle, a maintenance truck from the mainland, probably checking the lighthouse after. The storm. Headlights cut through the rain, faint but growing closer. The hum didn't return, the voice stayed silent, and the thumping was gone. I ran outside, waving the flashlight, my legs shaky with relief. The driver, an older man, didn't ask questions, just drove me to town. I didn't go back to the lighthouse. I called the agency, quit the job, and left my gear behind. Now I'm back in the city, far from the coast. I stick to places with bright lights and people nearby. But some nights, when the power flickers or the wind howls, I hear that hum again, low, rhythmic calling. I check the locks, keep a crowbar close, and try to forget. But I know something's out there, something that came alive in that blackout, waiting for me to climb the tower.